I'll ask you my main question then.
Yes.
I've got a Jewish friend where I'm at college, and we've been having lots of discussions together.
Could you come closer to the microphone, please?
Okay.
No, you have pushed it downwards. Raise it and come closer, that's right.
Close forward.
No, it's all right, yes.
No, I've got a Jewish friend at college, and naturally he and I have lots of discussions. And a lot of our discussion is centered around the life and history of Hazrat Ibrahim ﷺ. Now, he says that in the Jewish traditions there is the following among the traditions. One of the traditions is this, that Hazrat Ibrahim first married Hazrat Hagar and had Ishmael through him. Then he married Hazrat Sarah and had Isaac. Now they believe that Hagar was sort of thrown away into the desert, but later on she was remarried to him, and I think her name was changed to Kutar or something.
Huh?
Something like Kutar.
Keturah is a different girl, a different lady, altogether. It's not Hagar.
Yes, okay, that clears one point. No, that clears one point.
Keturah and Hagar are not the same persons.
Yes, but this is in their traditions as this is in their traditions as they believe.
No, I don't think so. It's in the Bible it's very clear, very clearly mentioned. Does he only read traditions and never reads Bible?
Well, he gave me some quotation from the Bible that
in the Bible,
I'll come back to him on this.
It nowhere says that Keturah is Hagar. What the Bible says is that Sarah was the first name of Hazrat Saira, as she is known now. Later on it was changed into Saira. Instead of Sarah, it was changed into Saira. But it doesn't mix up Keturah with Sarah at all, or with Hagar either. Please.
Well, anyway, but the most interesting thing that I want to ask you about...
But what was the point of the question? That I couldn't follow. What was the point?
No, I was just giving...
Suppose what he says is correct, then what would be the point? What would be the question?
Well, the question... Well, actually, that wasn't part of the question. It was just some background.
I see.
To what I was leading into. Well, anyway, they believe that through Keturah, he had 6 sons through her. And the interesting thing is that there is some traditions which says that these 6 sons, or at least some of them, were then sent under God's command to India to preach the concept of one God, and it was through these that the main bulk of the Vedic tradition was established. And I'm just wondering if you would comment on this, if you know anything about it.
In Bible, in every period of some important prophet, you will find reference to these things. For instance, to begin with Hazrat Adam ﷺ. Bible tells us that his sons went here and there, particularly the one who had killed, he was expelled from that region. And then he went somewhere else and married so-and-so, and then his progeny spread in those regions, and the other son, Japheth, and thing in that. All this has been mentioned. This is the style of the Bible. And Hazrat Noah is also then mentioned, Hazrat Noah, that his sons migrated after the boat landed at Judy, which they call Ararat. They don't agree with the Holy Quran's name of the mountain where the boat actually touched land, but they believe that it was Ararat. Hazrat Muslim Maud has solved this dilemma by explaining that Ararat means the same thing as Judi. In fact, first of all, Hazrat Masih Maud mentioned this subject. He said Ararat means I see, I have seen the land or something, and that mountain was named Ararat. And Judi also has the significance which points to the same place. That has been discussed in detail by Hazrat Mufti Maud. But that is neither here nor there. The Bible from then on gives a complete description of the people of Hazrat Noah leaving that place for various destinations, and they were directed, each of them, by Hazrat Noah to go to that country and spread their progeny there, and for the other to go to that country and spread his progeny there, and so on and so forth. So it's not surprising at all. This is exactly in step with the biblical style that Hazrat Abraham's sons are also being described as going to various countries and occupying those lands. Now, this could be partly true. What I'm coming to is a very important point. Perhaps you did not have that question in mind, but I have that question and I wanted to explain that. The biblical authors are, after all, human beings. They have recorded the sayings of God, or they are supposed to have recorded the sayings of God. So the position of Bible is comparable to the tradition, not to the Holy Quran entirely. I mean, part of the Bible is Word of God, but the narration part, which is being related by someone else, some scribe, is not to be taken as part of the Word of God. So it's all mixed up. This is why there is so much confusion in some places and there are so many contradictions. So what is happening is that these scribes are recording history, which may not necessarily be a revelation of God. And they are recording history on the presumption that Adam was the first human being. And because it was from him that all the human race started, we must trace all the human races back to Adam. So to explain how human race spread from one single person, how it branched off at various stages of history, and where those people went and occupied, they have related all these things, one of which you are relating to me now, you are referring to me, to one of which you are referring now. So these things should be understood in this general perspective. And they don't mean anything important to us today. Because we know positively, and we know that the Holy Quran has also very categorically mentioned this fact, that Adam was not the first man. And the humanity did not branch off at various stages from only the progeny of Adam. So when you understand this, then you can also understand the differences between color and racial habits and the whole style of life of various people. They are not connected so closely as if only 6,000 years ago or 7,000 years ago. If they are related, they are very distant relations. For instance, Europeans and the Africans and the Chinese, and the Chinese and the Aborigines of Australia, they belong to completely different people who might not have been the children of the same Adam at all. And if they were related, they must have been related at a very, very remote past. So in this view, in this perspective, the importance of all these narrations and who went where is completely lost to us. It recedes into insignificance. So tell him the facts of life as the modern man of today must agree to. You tell him this is the fact, and if this is what the Bible really says, then it's not the word of God at all. Because the act of God cannot contradict the word of God. The act of God is before us. Nature has unveiled its mysteries to a great extent. We know them, we can see things. But if the Bible is telling us a very different story from what's happening and that has happened before, then we would reject Bible rather than follow your intricate ways of arguments and reach a wrong conclusion at all. Follow me?
Thank you.
Yes, please.
This is not a question, but on the blessed occasion of the nikah of Aziza Muhammad with Aziza Sadia, on behalf of every single member of the Jamaat Ahmadiyya in the United Kingdom, I congratulate Huzur,
Jazakumullah
Sahab Sial, Brother Hamidullah Sahab, and Aziza Muhammad Fazal Haq. May Allah bless this.
Yes, I had to congratulate me in Urdu. I could have said Khair Mubarak, but in English I can't say Khair congratulations. But the same case that's a good word. Yes, thank you.
Huzur, I spent 32 years of my life in Bengal, and there they're not able to pronounce Seen very well.
Yes.
And very often, instead of same to you, they say shame to you.
Very good. There was a Mai in our house, you know her very well, she was an institution. And she could not pronounce the word they when it was they, and could not pronounce the word J when it was J. She would always pronounce they as J and J as they. No, she would only reverse their positions. So there was someone by the name of Jaleel. So the Mai was always wondering, and we tried to convince her that this is not so, but she would not believe. She said, look at the parents, the poor child. They themselves made him Jaleel by giving him this name. She always said, I can't understand what happened to them. Poor thing, he's always being called Jaleel. So these things happen, you know. The differences in pronunciation always create certain interesting situations. Yes, please tell your name, Sullah Sahib.
Hazur, particularly in Pakistan, they are mixing up the word secularism with la diniyat.
That's right, which is wrong, of course, you know that, yes.
I would like to put this question as to what is the difference between the political study or in the political field, what is the difference between Islam and secularism?
Yes. The word secularism is one of the most misunderstood terms of the modern political science, particularly in certain regions where people and certain leadership does intentionally want to misrepresent this word for their own motives. And this particular word in Pakistan is understood as irreligious. Secularism means irreligionism or hostility towards religion, which secularism does not mean at all. They want it to be translated so because then they would have handle to fight independent, honest regimes. I mean, the concept of independent, just, honest regimes which would distribute justice equitably to everyone. And so they say, either it is secularism or Islam, choose between the two. They create a paradox first between secularism and Islam and then make the choice, either choose secularism or Islam, which is totally wrong. Because secularism in certain areas is not at all opposed to religion or Islam itself. Maybe to some other religions, the concept of secularism is hostile. But to Islam, it's exactly the opposite. In fact, it is the only religion in the world which has taught secularism in certain fields, and it's a part of the Islamic teachings. This is the most important fact which is being ignored by certain interested politicians in our country, unfortunately. But before explaining this, let me make the differentiation between secularism and regimes or concepts opposed and hostile to religion. They are not called secular. They themselves are situated in another extreme. They are the shadow of exactly the opposite shadow of our religious regime, which becomes dictatorial in the name of religion. Similarly, non-religious regimes in the name of some philosophies become dictatorial. Neither the first nor the second can be called secular, because secular means justice. Secular means lack of bias towards anything. So you must understand the word secularism in this perspective. For instance, communism. Communism is a philosophy which is not secular at all. It is a philosophy which is hostile to religion. It is a philosophy which creates regimentation, and a regimented regime, which is the dictatorship of the so-called masses, comes into being. Now, this type of government can never be called secular government. They are anti-religious governments, yes. They are anti-liberty governments, anti-individualism governments, whatever name you may give according to their nature, they are not secular. Similarly, the so-called Islamic regimes which trample upon human rights can never be called Islamic either. Here, I am not saying they cannot be called secular. I say they cannot be called Islamic, because in this respect, Islam and secularism become one and the same thing. In the way a government should be run, the entire teachings of Islam can be declared secular teaching. There is no hint whatsoever of any discrimination in Islamic teachings, how a political system should be run, how a government should be run. Islam is so careful about this that it says, "La yajrimannakum shananu qawmin ala alla ta'dilu idlu huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa." When you dispense justice, not even the enmity of a people should compel you to deviate from the course of justice. Justice must be dispensed with. In the entire system of government to which references are found either in the Holy Quran or the tradition, everywhere you will find strict adherence to the correct concept of secularism. There is no other teaching but secularism as far as the governments are concerned. And also it is a secular subject. It's not a religious subject. Government is a wider sphere. It's a sphere which does not exactly tally with the religious sphere. In one country, a government can be religious and people can belong to either other religions or to atheism or non-religious entities. So these two things may not tally with each other. So if Islam had made a discrimination between religious people as against non-religious people or Muslims against non-Muslims, what sort of government that would be? A completely unjust government. Discrimination means that not because of your own merit in certain cases of civil rights, but entirely because you belong to a certain faith, you should be preferentially treated. This is what discrimination is. So if you remove all discriminations, what is left is secularism. So Islam, because it is the greatest champion and the loudest champion of absolute justice, it could not teach otherwise than secularism in those regions where religion has nothing to do. Religious differences have nothing to do. Religion has, of course, something to do, but religious differences have nothing to do. It's not time to discuss the subject at more detail, but remember this point, and this should be conveyed to others, that Islam in its political philosophy, Islam in its concept of the government is 100% secular and does not make any distinction, any differentiation between a Muslim and a non-Muslim. Not only that, it goes one step further. It does not make discrimination between one people, one geographical entity and another geographical entity. As far as the justice is concerned, it's absolute in Islam. So this is the true definition of secularism. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, some vested interests first give a completely wrong definition of secularism and then start opposing it in the name of Islam. But if that is the definition, then we are also opposed to it. If secularism does mean hostility to God, hostility to religion, interference into the private affairs of religious people, restrictions on religion, opposition of religion in any form, then of course we are opposed to that secularism. And that is exactly the secularism which now we see in Pakistan, under this definition. If this is the definition of secularism, then Pakistan is under secular rule, because they are making distinction from the point of view of religion and are hostile to religious freedom, are interfering in religious liberties. So if that is what secularism is, then they have got it already. They should be congratulated for that. Any other question, please? Nasir Sahib, after you, I should like Mr. Bashir Hayat to ask a question, because he is getting really now out of control.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes.
Tradition tells us that the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, used to go to the cave Hira before his ministry and he used to worship there. I always wonder what type of worship he did at that time, what form of worship, was it in meditation?
Did you ask this question before?
No, I never asked, sir.
And were you not here when I answered this question?
Here. So if it was
You were not here?
No.
So every time you are not here, must we repeat the same question? Same answer?
No, Huzur, that it has been asked. If it has been asked, you could ignore it.
Yes, this was asked and I answered that question in detail. Only I think a few weeks ago.
I wasn't here. Now, would you allow me to tell you about one thing about seen of sheen? Because you have
yes.
But would I be allowed to say also in Urdu, because the taste will be only...
Of course, naturally, yes.
हुजूर एक शख्स ने अपने एक दोस्त को शरीफा भेजा. शरीफा अपने नौकर के हाथ. जब वो नौकर लेकर आया तो उसने कहा कि फला ने शरीफा भेजा है. उसका नाम इत्तफाक से शरीफ था. तो वो सुनकर कहने लगा उसका दोस्त, कम वक्त कभी शीन भी बोल लिया कर. उसने कहा सलाम भी कहा है.
सलाम भी कहा है.
सलाम भी कहा है.
Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum. So this question rose to my mind because before I was used to talk with the Muslim people in Pakistan. Now I talk to the Christians and they ask the questions about Islam, which are all over the world, which is happening in the world, so-called Islamic world. The question arose in my mind is that why a noble religion, the image of a noble religion, Islam, was damaged by the history, while it is quite difficult to remove this bad image and to...
By which history?
I mean Islamic, so-called Islamic, what is happening in the Islamic countries. I mean, for instance, Iran and nowadays in Pakistan, and when we talk to them, they ask these questions which are absolutely...
I mean, what you mean to say perhaps is this, that the conduct of certain Muslim governments, contemporary governments, is such as brings bad name to Islam.
Yes.
And when you preach Islam to non-Muslims, they always quote the examples of these Islamic so-called, as you said, Islamic countries, and it's a hindrance in the way of your preaching.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So you should stick to the principles. First of all, settle the affair with them that if the majority, our people, is Christian, shall we call it a Christian government? If the majority of our people is Muslim, shall we call it a Muslim government or Islamic government? This issue has to be sifted first before you enter into debate. Now they would say in answer that yes, we understand this distinction, but there is another difference. We do not declare ourselves to be Christian governments, while these governments declare themselves to be Muslim governments. So, you are to be condemned. The answer to that is that you have been quoting different examples, not only of one Iranian government for instance, but also Sudan and Pakistan. And in each case, the Islam they are presenting is different. So obviously, it is not Islam which is in operation there. It's only because if it were Islam which is in operation there, in every Muslim country, the type of government should have been the same. But the type of the government is different, the quality of the government is different, their proclamations within the country and for the outside world are completely different. And and their conduct within and without to the Muslims and to the non-Muslims is completely different. So first, when there is such a confusion, of course they are at fault for creating that confusion. But at least they have produced a confusion where you cannot hit Islam unless you first define which is Islam and which is not Islam. So we are not talking of Muslims, we are talking of Islam. So before striking at Islam, you must first define, because there is so much confusion, you don't know which is true Islam and which is wrongly attributed Islam. So ultimately it would break down to this simply, that you should say, ask me, what is the Islamic concept of government? I am bound to give references to the Holy Quran and to the tradition. Before I expect you to believe in that. And if I prove it categorically that this is Islam, then if this Islam is in practice anywhere and that has proved a failure or it appears to be an atrocity to you, then of course you can censure it, but not without it. So always start discussions on principles. Otherwise, in the world of today, through the different conducts of human beings, there is so much confusion caused that it's impossible to reach the truth by trying to reach it through the study of these people. Another answer to this is that, all right, if the present governments in this country, the government in Europe or in certain parts of America do not claim to be Christian governments, yet in the very recent past we know some governments who did declare themselves to be Christian governments. For instance, the Spanish government, only a few years ago, and it trampled upon human rights, it did this and that to its own countrymen, to Christianity as well. Would you accept this argument, that if the Spanish government was wrong and this was to be censured, Christianity should be censured and it should be declared wrong? What is the answer to this? So first do away with all these confusions and mists. Then will be very clear in your mind what to say and what to accept and what to reject.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, please.
Sir, I seek permission tomorrow, sir, or at some other suitable occasion to let me have about 10 minutes for Zikr Khair of Hazrat Mirza Zafar Ahmad Sahib Marhum.
Right.
He was a member of the Jamaat here.
Inshallah, tomorrow. Very good. Yes. Now, Bashir Riyad Sahib, at last it is your turn. पूछेंगे कितना वक्त मिलेगा? मैं से पूछेंगे कितना वक्त? अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
As this is the last questions, would you...
Last questions.
I thought today Chaudhry Rashid is not here, so I brought 5 questions. So if Hazur will allow me more than one at a time.
Well, you didn't leave any room for me to decide on this issue. You already said questions. Yes.
Jazakallah.
Please.
Ta'alluq billah, to have a permanent connection with Allah Ta'ala, is a vast subject. Would Hazur throw some light on this subject for us, or advise us if any tape-recorded lecture, thus or a book is available on this particular subject?
Yes, there is a book available on this particular subject. Exactly, under the title Ta'alluq Billah, there is a book available. कहाँ इमाम साहब है ना आपके पास? Okay? Second question, please.
The spiritual children of the promised Messiah alayhi salam number millions in the world, but this evening my subject is regarding the children from his progeny. As the promised Messiah alayhi salam in one of his poems in the form of prayer said, "Ikse hazar hove, Mola ke yaar hove, they may increase
हजार होंगे बाबर को बार ही होंगे
बाबर को बार हों
मौला के यार होंगे हक पर निसार होंगे these are the words yes.
They may increase from
haven't you translated this haven't you translated this couplet which you have quoted
yes Huzur, in English
read the translation yes
they may increase from 1 to 1,000 at the same time they may be beloved of Allah Ta'ala.
No, this is wrong. This translation is wrong. From 1 to 1,000 is not the import of the couplet at all. It means that they should increase so profusely that at each step one should become 1,000, you know. That is a way of expressing a very rapid growth in every direction. One should become 1,000 and then the second time every one of the 1,000 should become 1,000 again. And so on and so forth. Recurrent. This is the translation.
Would Hazur kindly enlighten us about the fulfillment of this prayer of the promised Messiah alayhi salam?
You have in fact restricted me by imposing a condition upon me that I should only talk of the blood relations of Hazrat Masih Maud alayhi salatu wasalam, his physical progeny, while this verse applies to all the Ahmadis. Why should you first restrict it to his own children, physical sons and daughters, and then raise this question? Now, if you translate this as this here in this context, then it's impossible in this short time that one should become 1,000. Even if each one among them had married 4 times, it couldn't be possible. After all, there is a limitation to multiplication through marriage. So how could you think of this? That is not only, of course you could say that it is about the physical progeny, the blood, the sons and daughters, but ikse hazar hone is not restricted to that. It means that each one should be able spiritually to spread out and grow into number in every direction. With the result that Muslim Maud, for instance, Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib, Hazrat Mirza Sharif Ahmad Sahib, you take these individual examples. It was not only some sons and some daughters which they left behind. Because of their preaching, because of the literature they left, because of their example, they left many, many thousands and thousands of Ahmadis. Hazrat Muslim Maud in particular is responsible for conversion of hundreds of thousands of Ahmadis as we find them today. So they are all a fulfillment of this prayer. Not a prophecy, but it's a prayer. But a prayer which has been accepted by God, and we see the fulfillment of this today, that each one of Hazrat Masih Maud sons and daughters is not just that, but it has grown into many, many thousands, or hundreds of thousands even. Now, instead of asking this question the way you have tried to ask it, you could have simply asked me, what is the number of the family of Masih Maud today?
In fact, Hazur, this was written originally.
But your editor has changed it to this.
But somebody advised me,
Yes, I know.
don't ask this question to Hazur
That
because
is what happens with your
not be
question.
ready for the answer. Give the number
The
or something.
scholarly editors you go to always play havoc with your questions. Just a very question which came to your mind was distorted into all this. So the number I don't remember because they are growing every week or so. With the grace of Allah. I think all told, they have not yet reached the number 1,000. But in the next explosion of the generation, in the next generation explosion, inshallah, I think they would immediately enter that 1,000 class, and from then on it would be a very rapid progress, inshallah.
Not my mistake, my honorable editors, they said they advised me not to ask the numbers so that...
Kya?
My honorable editor's mistake.
Yes, that's right, yes. I agree.
Jazakallah Hazur, if I'm so happy that Hazur, what was in my mind also, has answered that.
Yes, it was almost everybody. It's not very
I was
difficult to
still
understand.
in my rough papers.
Huh?
I was still in my rough papers, written down the numbers and all this. It was written. So I omitted that.
So it's better you bring the rough papers with you.
No, I omitted that, put a blank.
Fine.
I omitted that with ink and all this.
Yes, yes, bring everything in ink and all this, because those questions will be pure and simple and easier to answer. But they get complicated when you put them through the mill of these editors.
No, they are useful editors.
All right.
Another question or no time left?
I think you can ask a question or two, maybe. Already you have asked two questions. Haven't you?
This Hazur, I don't know how, it's a small question, but how you will be able to make it short.
Yes, please.
In this world,
Yes.
there are volcanoes, warm streams in cold oceans. For example, the Gulf
Warm streams in old oceans?
warm streams in cold oceans.
Old oceans.
Cold oceans.
Cold, I'm sorry. I was surprised.
In cold oceans.
In cold oceans, I understand.
For example, the Gulf Stream,
Yes.
which comes round to the British coast, which keep this country warm.
Temperate.
Yes.
It is responsible for making the climate temperate in this country, yes.
And natural gases.
And also European climate is affected by the stream.
Yes.
So, what is the question?
And crude oil erupting from both land and sea. As they are an important geographical and geological phenomenon, would Hazur kindly explain how they have been mentioned in the Holy Quran and Ahadith of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam?
What? I mean, you want is the Gulf Stream which is responsible for making the climate of England temperate, and the White Sea oil which is discovered here has also been mentioned in the Holy Quran? Is that what you mean?
All these phenomena.
Pardon?
It's an important phenomena, geographical and all this. The Holy Quran is the book for all the knowledge and all this. So, Hazur, if there is some
But do you know how many?
it is explained?
Do you know how many branches of science there are? How many branches of science there are, and how many sub-branches of sciences, or each science, in fact, have already come into existence, and they are further being subdivided. And the universe is, of course, fathomless, but the knowledge of the universe which we have so far gained has also become almost fathomless for an ordinary person. Even for scientists, it's impossible to know everything in every direction. So more and more specialization in this and that. It is because of the extreme vastness of knowledge which already has come to in their approach. I mean, that is within their approach. They can reach it, but they can't. I mean, each man cannot reach every branch of knowledge and study it entirely. This is the state of affairs. Now, if all these things were mentioned in the Holy Quran by name, and also all those things which are yet to be discovered by man, then what would you think would be the volume of the Holy Quran? Now you can recite it and complete one recitation, say easily within a few days. Now then, if what you are expecting from the Holy Quran, if that had really happened, if you had planned things instead of Allah, then you know the book, the Holy Quran, would be so big that no human description can describe how big that would be. But the Holy Quran itself has described. The Holy Quran itself has already answered your question in the way that don't let your fancy roam unrestricted in every direction and try to find everything in detail in the Holy Quran. If you do that, then do you know what the volume of the Holy Quran would be? It says, قُلْ لَوْ كَانَ الْبَحْرُ مِدَادًا لِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّي لَنَفَذَ الْبَحْرُ قَبْلَ أَن تَنْفَذَ كَلِمَاتُ رَبِّي وَلَوْ جِئْنَا بِمِثْلِهِ مَدَدًا. If all the words of God, if were to be expressed in black and white, were to be written down, then if all the oceans were turned into inks and the entire ink of the oceans were dried out, still the description of Allah's creation would not run out. Even if God created similar oceans to help the previous ones, and they also got dried out, yet the description of the knowledge which is to be found in this universe would not run out. So how big would that Quran be, which discusses these kalimat in detail by name? Can you imagine? How much can be written by the ink of one ocean? And can you further imagine that how much could be written, how many pages, by the inks of all the oceans? And if they were doubled, how big that would be? That book, I mean. Can you imagine?
It wouldn't have finished yet, sir.
Pardon?
It wouldn't have finished.
Yes. It would be in the process of being written. And you are expecting that.
What? Just like I say in Urdu few words, if Hazur allowed me.
No, I think you better speak in English.
I don't know.
Because
if Hazur tell me the
English
of that tree called
that imposes some limitations on you. In Urdu you will be like those seas, unlimited. Like the oceans you are mentioning.
No, Hazur, there is a tree called board in Urdu. I don't know the English of that.
Well, I'd call it board. You will understand.
The seed is so small.
Yes.
But the tree is so big and everything. So there is what I thought in my little knowledge in the Holy Quran, as Hazur has said. I wanted to find out if a thought comes into my mind or with my colleagues and we discuss it. And then the answer should be...
You know, but the seed of a tree as compared to the size of the tree has some ratio, some proportion, of course. And that seed is visible because the proportion is not that large. But the creation of God is so huge, so big, that even if the whole of the Quran were to be treated as a seed, you would not be able to reach through that seed every corner, every nook and corner of that great creation. Only if something is already displayed and by chance you get the connection, that is possible, of course. But seeds are of course there. But seeds to so many things that even if I point out, in that small mirror of the seed, you will not be able to see the reflection of the white seed to which you are referring, or the Gulf Stream to which you are referring. The oil, for instance, it is there already, we know, but it was not known to us some time ago. A few hundred years ago, there was no concept of any oil, but the coal was known. 1,000 years or some more years earlier, the coal was unknown, but the wood, the firewood was there, of course. So you travel back in history and you find at various stages in the history of man, man was, of course, the same being, but his universe was different in size. At certain stages, his universe was small. At another stage, the universe was enlarged. And he knew more and more things. And this is not just accidental. There is a definite relationship to his knowledge and to his excesses in the universe. When his knowledge was limited and he could only use the simple firewood for some purposes, exactly according to the knowledge he had access to the firewood. When his knowledge increased and he could also put to some use coal, which use was other than the ordinary firewood use, he also came upon coal as a reservoir waiting for him. And when his knowledge increased and went beyond the boundaries of coal, and it required something like liquid fire, then he came across oil. Is that not the story of man's find? And this is how the North Sea oil was discovered. And the Holy Quran says, "In min shayn illa indana khazainuhu wa ma nunazziluhu illa biqadarin ma'lum." That there is nothing of which we do not have treasures and unlimited stores. No, it doesn't say unlimited stores, but there is nothing but we have great reservoirs and stores and treasures of so many things. Yet we do not disclose them to mankind, except according to a certain set design. Illa biqadarin ma'lum. Qadarin ma'lum means a design which is prefixed and which is scientifically controlled, mathematically controlled. So nothing is by chance. Previously, when you look back at the same history, you might have imagined that this discovery of coal and discovery of oil, they were all accidental things. But now see it through this verse of the Holy Quran, that we have created so many things for mankind and we have vast stores of these things in our possession, but we do not reveal them to mankind except according to a certain judgment and according to a set design. Now you look back and everything falls into step and in unison. So this is the window which I see, which is related to this question. but it is such a short window, such a small seed, that it's not possible for everyone to agree that exactly this is the verse which covers all this vast field. So this is what I meant, that you may even reach that point where you think a vast store of knowledge is referred to, and through the window of that small opening you can see is full universe. But the ratio is so big that those who do not believe in the Holy Quran, they may not agree with you. They say, yes, you go on believing because you believe. But we don't think that everything is discussed therein, because it is just one casual reference to something. So do not demand certain things which is impossible for you to stick to, or for anyone else to lead you to as you desire. But be assured that if you really, in all earnestness, want to find out the sources of knowledge in the Holy Quran, you can always be guided, if Allah so pleases, to certain verses which will be the controlling factors, which would be the pivotal points for some vast spheres of knowledge. You reach them and you reach that knowledge, and that can be, you can reach through the windows, I should say, vast areas of knowledge through various verses of the Holy Quran. But to expect the main White Sea, that is beyond every limitation. And to expect that Gulf Stream would be mentioned as such in the Holy Quran, that is breaking every record. Yes.
Mention these things just in one group. Not individually. I thought this is a phenomenon of geographical. Other things are...
No, the geographical phenomena are also mentioned.
Yes, yes.
But in meaning, each geographical phenomena could never be discussed in the Holy Quran. There are groups of phenomena which are discussed, of course. The creation of earth at various stages, and the beginning of life and the process of life, and all these things are mentioned in the Holy Quran. The rotation of the planets and the heavenly bodies and their balance and how they are hanging in the air, all these things in principle are of course discussed. But to say, to demand from any Muslim that show me the name of Pluto or Uranus or any other planet or any other star in particular, that would be extending your imagination too far, your demands too far.
I wanted to ask the window how we can get the knowledge. Azur has explained.
So how many things have you started seeing through this window?
Knowledge, as Azur has said, that is vast. God's portions will be finished, but still the knowledge will not finish.
Yes,
for that explanation.
That's what I wanted to convey to you. Alhamdulillah, the message has been conveyed.
So I'll leave one question for tomorrow, Azur.
No, you can ask this question today. Well, maybe we will more time to Rashid Sahib tomorrow.
Azur, I got some questions for tomorrow also.
Huh?
I got some questions for tomorrow also.
All right, ask one question.
Only one, yes.
Only one, yes.
Only one.
But not with two branches.
I had brought the holy book, but I will not read as the passage is known to everybody. So I read only the reference. Contrary
Yes.
to the clear teachings of the Holy Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, Part 1, verse 115 and 116, up to 116. And practice of the Holy Prophet.
Do you think this is known to everybody? Those verses to which you are referred by numbers, Do you think everybody here knows which verses you are referring to?
No, the Holy Book is here. I just give the reference only.
What I mean to say is, when you
read the reference, if Hazur give me time.
In the beginning you claimed that although the Holy Book is here and I could have recited these verses, but because these verses are known to everyone, and the moment I mention them, everybody would know which verses you are referring to, so there is no need to go to the Holy Quran and start reciting from there. This was the ground laid by you.
No, Hazur,
is that not correct?
No, I could not explain what I wanted to convey, Hazur.
I think you did explain, we couldn't understand.
Hazur, what I wanted to save time, I had in mind to read the relevant passage.
Yes.
If Hazur allow me, I can read the relevant passage.
No, but without that in mind, how can I answer the question? Because even I haven't received that question, that reference. I have not understood that reference. Without first referring to the verse, at least read a part of some verse, or I will not be able to answer you.
Please, everybody help me to
give the reference. आप नहीं लंबा कर देंगे, उनसे क्या reference
Surah Al-Baqarah,
reference दे दें.
verse 115 and 116. It's the first part. Maybe page 20 or something like that.
Yes, please. No, I know that. Now what is the question?
Hazur, if somebody can read loudly so that everybody will know which surah is that. So,
Man azlamu mimman iftara alallahi man azlamu mimman mana masajid allahi an yuskara fi asmuhu wa sa'a fi kharabiha. Who is more Azlam is not cruel, no. Unjust is not also not enough. Who is more severe in transgression than the one who prevents people, mana masajid Allah and yuskara fi asmuhu, who prevents people from remembering Allah in the mosques, wasafi kharabeha, and endeavor towards desolation of the mosques. This is the meaning of this verse which you refer to. Now what is the question?
And the practice of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who even allowed Christian visitors to pray in his mosque. Some of the Muslim sects do not allow Muslims belonging to other sects to pray in their mosques. Would Hazur kindly let us know whether this un-Islamic practice started after the promised Messiah alayhi salam proclaimed that he was the reformer of this age, and advise us whether this is confined to Pakistan or is practiced in any other Muslim country also.
Hazrat Masih Maud came or was sent by Allah to this world to reform the erroneous practices which had found their way into the Islamic world. So obviously every Ahmadi should have expected that all these un-Islamic practices must have found their way into the Islamic life before Hazrat Masih Maud came. I mean, this is a surprising thing from you, that you are asking me whether this started after Hazrat Masih Maud's advent. It couldn't have. All these bad practices found their roots in Islamic world much earlier, and Hazrat Masih Maud found Islam in such a miserable state. This is the reason of his coming. This is why he was sent by Allah. So that is the first part of your question. The second is that as far as the Muslim sects are concerned, although their number is supposed told to be 72, but this is not a static number. This has been changing from time to time, and except for one or two Sufi sects or some Sufi sects, which are not sects based on jurisprudence, the rest of the 72 sects, which are based on jurisprudence or based on doctrinal differences, they all ultimately ended up into this havoc. They started believing that their mosques are purer than the other mosques, and if anyone belonging to the other sect would enter their mosque, he would defile that mosque. Now these differences started entering the Islamic world at various stages in history, slyly and quietly, and no historical record of this is kept. And it may not have been a cut and dried case of each sect. It is possible that in certain sects, some mullahs took this attitude regarding their mosques, and the others of the same sect did not agree with them. But later on in the history, when those mullahs became the leaders of the people in that region, they started practicing it. So that in itself became a sect later on. So because all these things are not meticulously kept in historical books, they are not recorded as they should have been. So this is just a guesswork. We can imagine how such process starts psychologically and where they end up ultimately. But I cannot pinpoint in which time of history what particular malpractice entered Islamic practices. But as far as the time of Masih Maud is concerned, we know positively that before the advent of Hazrat Masih Maud, the differences between the Wahhabis and other Ahl Sunnah and the Shiites and the sects within the Shiites had grown to such bitterness, and such dimensions, and reached such bitterness that there were cases recorded where one person who belonged to a different sect went to another mosque for saying prayer, was so cruelly treated, so badly beaten up, that I don't remember any case of somebody dying, but I know in the history there are reports of many cases who were very severely beaten up. And also not only this, if somebody from one sect went to another mosque where it was not the practice to raise the index finger while saying Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, and somebody sitting around him, someone next to him noticed this, the moment he said Assalamu alaikum and they were free from the prayer, his finger would be severed, because he raised the finger in contradiction to the normal practice of that sect. And the vice versa was also true. In some cases, fingers were severed and cut off for not being raised, because that sect believed that those fingers should be raised. So either way you had it. If you went to the wrong mosque, you went at your own risk. And later on, such fatwa found their way into the Islamic world as, for the modern world, it's unbelievable how these things could have happened. But regular fatwa are issued in the Punjab and some other regions of India, where if a Wahhabi enters a Sunni mosque, how many buckets of water should suffice to cleanse that mosque of the filth? And in some cases it is declared that if a dog enters the mosque, you have to cleanse the mosque with 7 buckets of water. For instance, if a Wahhabi enters the mosque, it should be 10 times 7 the buckets of the number of buckets which would be able to cleanse that mosque. Such absurdity, such cruelty to Islam has been committed by the followers of Islam, that these things have become extremely absurd and meaningless and a matter for laughing rather than a matter to pursue seriously. I beg your pardon,
Still last
it
point.
was decided between us that your question will be a single question, not divided into 2 branches.
The same question.
Excellent.
Whether this confined to Pakistan or is practiced in any other Muslim country also.
Everywhere in Iran, in Arabia, religious persecutions and heinous crimes of trampling of human rights were committed at various stages of history. People were brutally murdered for some allegations that he held such view, and the differences were doctrinal. And even the corpses of people were dug out and they were lashed. I mean, their remains were lashed and they were remained to hang by certain doors of the city for people to draw lessons from them, to learn lessons. That if you believed in such and such thing, it would be so heretic in the eyes of the mullahs of that area that even if you escape punishment while alive, your corpse would be meted out that punishment after your death. This was the extreme, which is not found in India. I mean, in some other regions of the Islamic world, the cases are very extreme. There are such extreme cases as one hangs one head in shame, discussing that part of history with non-Muslims. Some great Muslim saintly people, some scholars were treated like this. Their corpses were dug out and they were hung with the gates of the city and they were lashed and defiled and insulted. Because the mullahs of the time thought that they had escaped their punishment while, the mullahs were born later than such people were. So they said, we can still go back into history and punish such people.
In this case, Sayyid...
In this case, it is the third part of the question or what?
No, Hazur has said that Sayyid Abdul Latif Shaheed also was prosecuted due to the mullah's decision. What? No, I don't want that to express...
But this illustration doesn't belong to this question, to the answer of this question. I mean, this is nowhere connected with it.
Not a question. In the Hazur's answer, Hazur said they were prosecuted like that.
No, I said because of these sectarian differences, malpractices are noticed in the history of Islam, but shahadat is a different thing altogether. In shahadat it is truth versus, real truth versus the falsehood. But in these sorts of religious persecution which are sectarian in nature, it is not something like that, so clear-cut. It is all a mixed affair. It's a both-way traffic. One sect does the same, something to the other, and the other sect also. When it can do the same thing to the previous sect, it will do the same. So they are at par with each other as far as the commitment of atrocities is concerned. But the phenomena of shahadat is not to be bracketed with this phenomena at all. This is a very different thing. In that phenomena, cruelties and persecutions have only one way to flow. They flow from one direction into a certain direction. And the recipients of those cruelties, even if they have power, would not persecute others when they come to power. So you mixed unnecessarily and unnaturally the phenomena of shahada, the subject which we were discussing.
I'm sorry I'm sorry for that. I mixed up.
This is why I had to spend so much time in explaining, because then everything will get mixed up. The shahada is the same thing as if some mullah is killing someone else for doctrinal differences. Shahadat is a phenomenon when the truth is very clearly distinct and separate and does not permit darkness to penetrate itself. And the darkness is separate. And the wrongs done to the truth are not returned. The people are not paid back in the same coins. Where persecution is persecution and it would not be permitted. That is where you find the martyrdoms, the true martyrdoms as Islam believes in them.
Clear that.
Now if you apply this to the Ahmadiyya situation, exactly this is the difference. They fight between each other, of course. But where the Sunnis can kill Shias, they would, and where Shias can kill Sunnis, they would. It's a both for traffic and free for all, no principles. But as far as the Ahmadis are concerned, you are the focus of attention from all hostile groups. And in each case, the persecution is flowing from their direction to your direction, and never from your direction to their direction. So that shows that if an Ahmadi is killed, it is not killed like any other person due to the doctrinal differences. He is a shaheed in the true terminology of Islam. All right. I promised you 3/4 of an hour, and we have already spent an hour and a half perhaps. Huh?